No Basta Rezar by Ali Primera, who is really founder of the Nueva Constitución movement in Venezuela. As Michael Shifter in Washington, D.C. of the Inter-American Dialogue, how is it that President Chavez managed to survive this coup and retain power when so many, from President Aristide of Haiti to Honduras's Zelaya to, well, famously, of course, President Allende in Chile, did not survive their coups?
Well,
the coups against them, I should say, that the U.S. was involved with.
There's a lot of history of failed coups in Latin America. And there are other cases as well. President Chavez himself attempted a coup in 1992 in Venezuela that failed. And this one failed as well. Fortunately, I think it failed. And, you know, there are a lot of cases where there's an attempted overthrow of a democratically elected legitimate government like Chavez in April of 2002. And obviously he had a lot of support. Obviously this was, you know, terribly done, and I'm glad that it failed. I think that the statement from the White House was terrible and shameful and disgraceful. But I think that this is, you know, this is why he didn't follow the you know, of Allende and others. I think that the circumstances are just very, very different. I don't think you can compare this and put this in the same category. The time was different, the circumstances were different, the role of the United States was different, and again, I think that if one looks at a variety of countries, one can see other cases and examples of coups that didn't succeed. And I'm happy when they don't succeed, because I think when you have a legitimate government that's elected by the people and you have an interruption in democracy, that is a very serious, troubling development. So I'm glad it didn't succeed in April 2002.
There's an old Latin American.
I'm glad Chavez's didn't either.
There's an old Latin American joke that says, why hasn't the U.S. ever undergone a coup? And that's because there's no U.S. embassy here.
I'd like to ask Michael Shifter your sense of where what the future now holds in terms of Venezuela. The ability of the opposition to mount a strong campaign against Nicolas Maduro. Obviously, Maduro is going to be the candidate of the Chavez forces. What do you look for now in the coming days in terms of indications of where the situation in Venezuela will go?
Well, I think they're going to be elections. I think Maduro is going to be the candidate. I think he has the chances are that he's going to be elected. All the polls show that. The opposition is very, very demoralized, very fragmented. They lost in October by 11 points. They lost the governorships in December. They're looking for a strategy. They're wondering about their leadership. So I think the government certainly has the upper hand, and I think that the government will come together. There are different factions within Chavismo, but I think they'll come together, certainly in the short term. So I look for the short term for things to be fairly stable and fairly steady under the leadership of Nicolas Maduro. I think that's probably the likely scenario. What I'm going to look for is more in the next 6 to 8 months, when if the economic situation continues to deteriorate, and you might want to look for some strains and infighting within the Chavez camp. Nobody can match Chavez's charisma and his ability to hold together the different forces within Chavismo. He had that unique ability. Maduro, for all of his whatever skills he has, he doesn't have that talent, and I think that we could see developing some real tensions within the Chavez camp that could really has the potential at least to create some turmoil. But for the short term, my guess is that things will that Maduro will be the president. The opposition has a long way to go to regroup and come up with an alternative strategy. Hopefully they'll work on that and do that, but they just suffered 2 defeats and they're figuring out what to do.
Nicolas Maduro, of course, now is the Venezuelan vice president. In October 2007, when he was Venezuela's foreign minister, we had a chance to interview him. It was a year after President Chavez had famously referred to then-President George W. Bush as the devil in a speech before the General Assembly. Before we hear from Maduro, let's go to that clip of Chavez at the UN in 2006.
And the devil came here yesterday. Yesterday, the devil came here. Right here.
este mismo lugar.
Right here. And it smells of sulfur still today.
That was Hugo Chavez, Venezuela's president, speaking at the UN in 2006, referring to George W. Bush. Well, the next year, in 2007, I asked Nicolas Maduro what message he had for the United States.
Our message is a message, first of all, to draw a balance. Of what has happened over the last months in the world, what happened in the world, what's been the role of the United Nations to guarantee peace, how much the world has lost as a result of this crazy policy that is apparently will be prolonged with this attack against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Could reach a crazy level if we pretend to take the way of war to attack the Iranian people. Our message remains the same. The world should open their eyes. The U.S. society should react. The U.S. people can do a lot for peace, for stability in the planet, for the recovery of the planet. The awareness in the world today, it's also expressed in the United States. And we need a large, humane alliance between the U.S. people and the peoples of the world, respecting our diversity, cultural diversity, our different ways to see the world, and establishing a relationship of equality. That's the main message, and this has been the message of President Chavez a year ago.
Foreign Minister.
That was Vice President Nicolas Maduro, then Foreign Minister of Venezuela, talking with Democracy Now! I wanted to ask you, Eva, you know Nicolas Maduro well. Could you tell us who is he, his origins and development as part of the Chavez movement? And there are some who say that he's actually more politically to the left than Chavez was in terms of his perspectives and his analysis.
Yeah, well, I think also the previous response when talking about the coup and why it didn't function in Venezuela, even though it did for a 48-hour period, and that needs to be remembered, and talking about what will happen from now on, showed the sort of position that you see out of a lot of analysts in the United States and around the world that underestimates entirely the Venezuelan people and their capacity, the capacity of President Chavez, as well as others like Nicolas Maduro. Nicolas comes from working-class roots. He was a bus driver. He was a union organizer. He's someone who, was a part of grassroots movements, and he became a part of Chavez's movement when Chavez led a military rebellion in 1992 to try to oust a murderous and corrupt president at the time that most of Venezuelans actually supported that rebellion, which did fail. And that's when Chavez came on the scene, took responsibility for that publicly. He actually went to prison. While he was in prison, Nicolas joined in his movement. And the movement that Chavez had built originally had been out of the military. Chavez was a soldier. He was a lieutenant colonel in the armed forces in the army.
And as Shifter said, attempted a coup first before
attempted a military rebellion to overthrow the then President Carlos Andrés Pérez, who had, in 2.5 years before, ordered the state security forces to massacre the people of Venezuela when they protested his implementing neoliberal reforms in the country, privatization. More than 3,000 Venezuelans were killed. Mass grave sites were dug, and no one really knows the numbers that were killed by the government of that time. So a lot of people supported what Chavez was trying to do. Nobody knew him at the time. I mean, that's when he became known. And that's when Nicolas Maduro also began to know him. And so Chavez began to build, together with this group of grassroots organizers, a movement based on civil-military unity. And that was one of the key factors, actually, that defeated the coup in April 2002 against Chavez, was the fact that the military and the people came together, that people in Venezuela who had begun a transformation of the country, because a lot of times also what happens in Venezuela is underestimated. It's seen as, this government came into power, Chavez was elected, and he began to do all these radical reforms. But it's actually, we call it a revolution because that's what it is. It's a systematic transformation of every sector of society. And, that was beginning to take root in 2002 when the coup happened. And so that movement of people that Nicolás Maduro was a part of, he was then a member of parliament. He later became the head of parliament of Venezuela's National Assembly, president of the assembly. Chavez named him foreign minister in 2006, and he continued in that movement, in that position. He was ridiculed nonstop by Venezuelan media, internationally, by the opposition, saying, he's a bus driver. He knows nothing. He has no education. How could he be the top diplomat of the country? But he became, I think, one of Venezuela's best foreign ministers that they've ever had. I mean, he's led all kinds of treaties and agreements that Venezuela has entered into with countries throughout the world that have benefited Venezuela substantially. Most of Venezuelan foreign policy is now based on integration, cooperation, and mutual benefit, transfer of technology. I mean, no longer it's about just what can we get from the other guy. And so Nicolás has then become the most intimate advisor of the president, by his side, especially throughout this very difficult period. He was the one who was always with Chavez while he was undergoing his treatments in Cuba, and he was the one that clearly came through as the person with the most capacity to unify Chavismo and to carry on those policies. And I would definitely say that he certainly maintains a very radical and profound leftist position, and wholeheartedly will carry on the movement led by Chavez.
Gregory Woodford, I wanted to ask you about the role of the Venezuelan media, both in opposition to Chavez all this time, especially its role in Venezuelan society, because he's often been criticized as attempting to muzzle the media.
Right. Well, yeah, that's one of the things that constantly critics point out to, is that the media is somehow being repressed in Venezuela. But if you turn on the TV or look at the newspapers, you see constant diatribes and constant criticisms and raising of problems that exist in Venezuela. And so, I mean, it's very difficult to reconcile that with this claim that there's some kind of repression against the private media. The other thing is, people say that Chavez created all these other media outlets that are completely swamping the airwaves, but that's not true. It's true that there's many new media outlets, but they only actually get a very small percentage of the viewership, and so the private media actually still predominates in Venezuela, despite what the impression that people get from what's going on. And but there's a much greater diversity of opinions and of freedom of speech, really, because you also have tons of community media. So there's an incredible amount of debate going on.
We're going to continue this discussion. There will be a 7-day period of mourning. President Hugo Chavez will be buried on Friday. That's when his funeral will be. That does it for our show, and I want to thank all of our guests: Gregory Wilpert, founder of VenezuelaAnalysis.com; Eva Gollinger, friend and advisor to President Hugo Chavez, author of The Chavez Code; Miguel Tinker-Salas, professor at Pomona College in Claremont, California; Michael Shifter, president of the Inter-American Dialogue in Washington; and Greg Grandin, currently Coleman Fellow at the New York Public Library. You can go to our website at democracynow.org for complete coverage of Hugo Chavez, with our exclusive interviews with both Chavez and Maduro. That's democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Barker, Nate Felser, and Martin Nermin, Sheikh, Steve Martinez, Sam Alcoff, Honey Masood, Rabbi Karen, Dina Geiser, Amy Littlefield.